Why Somaliland's recognition strategy is a dead end, the political trap. For over 30 years, Republic of Somaliland has been stuck in a political argument that leads nowhere, pushing for de facto recognition instead of enforcing its de jure rights. This is the single biggest deadlock preventing Somaliland from reclaiming its rightful place in the international system. Somaliland is not an unrecognized new country. It is already recognized on June 26, 1960, as an independent, sovereign state. De facto means acting like an unrecognized new country. It means Republic of Somaliland is treated as a political anomaly, a self-governing region trying to prove it deserves recognition. Why? Because Republic of Somaliland keeps making the same fundamental mistake. It argues its case politically instead of legally. Under international law, de facto entities don't exchange diplomatic representatives, which is why Somaliland keeps dealing with the same diplomats assigned to failed non-state Somalia. This has allowed Somalia to monopolize international representation, steal Somaliland's credentials, and block its rightful seat at the table. Legal issues, the core of Somaliland's sovereignty. Legal issues, the core of Somaliland's sovereignty. Somaliland's insistence on framing itself as a functional democracy, stable government, and peaceful nation is admirable but legally irrelevant. A state does not need democracy to be recognized. Somaliland's right to statehood is not a political debate, it's a legal fact based on international law. Somaliland is already a de jure sovereign, recognized state on June 26, 1960. It gained independence from the UK, and over 35 countries, including the US, UK, and Egypt, recognized it. The so-called union with Somalia in July 1960 was never legally ratified, meaning Somaliland's sovereignty was never legally dissolved. Somalia annexed Somaliland's UN seat, sovereignty, and credentials in 1960, creating the illusion of a united Somali Republic, a fraud Somaliland never legally exposed. Without international legal recognition, Somaliland has no territorial protection, no access to international courts, and no recognized control over its airspace or resources. This is the real fight. Republic of Somaliland doesn't need new recognition, it needs to correct a historical legal fraud. Under international law, once a state has been recognized de jure, that recognition cannot simply be revoked, it remains valid unless the state itself legally dissolves. Which never happened in Somaliland's case. When a state is recognized de jure, it means its sovereignty is acknowledged as a legal fact, regardless of political changes. Political issues where Somaliland keeps wasting time. Somaliland's governments keep making political arguments for re-recognition, thinking that its stability, elections, and governance will earn it legitimacy. It boasts about being democratic, peaceful, and well-governed, while Somalia is a failed state. It promotes elections, free press, and institutions as proof it deserves recognition. It engages in diplomatic outreach, negotiations, and waiting for international approval. But here's the harsh reality: recognition isn't based on democracy. It's based on legal status. It needs legal clarity, and instead of fighting for that clarity, Somaliland's presidents have been stuck proving governance credentials that international law does not require. International law doesn't require democracy for sovereignty. There are plenty of recognized authoritarian states. Recognition isn't about who governs better, it's about legal status. Somalia is a failed state, yet it still holds a UN seat. If Somaliland keeps focusing on being a good example, it will remain trapped in political limbo. The world acknowledges Somaliland as a de facto state but doesn't acknowledge its de jure recognition because Somaliland isn't fighting the legal battle. Meanwhile, Somalia, a failed state, benefits from this confusion. As long as Somaliland plays the de facto game, Somalia continues to exploit Somaliland's stolen sovereignty, keep its UN seat, and maintain the lie that the union was ever valid. The self-determination trap: Somaliland is not a secessionist state. Because Republic of Somaliland makes its case using political arguments, it keeps repeating the self-determination argument, when in reality, Somaliland statehood is not a question of self-determination at all. Self-determination applies to regions that have never been independent and are seeking to create a new state, e.g., Palestine, Catalonia, Kurdistan, instead of asserting its existing de jure statehood, which is a legal fact. Republic of Somaliland was already a sovereign, recognized country on June 26, 1960. It's not trying to separate from Somalia, because legally, there was never a valid union or any type of ratified act of union in the first place. By repeating the self-determination argument, Somaliland unintentionally plays into Somalia's false narrative that Somaliland is just a region that is now trying to break away. Instead, Somaliland should be saying, "We are not seeking independence, we already had it. Somalia illegally annexed us, and we are reclaiming our rightful legal status." Somaliland's mistake is making political appeals when its case is fundamentally legal. That's why the world still treats it as a breakaway region instead of recognizing it as a sovereign state that was illegally occupied. The world's perspective, why Somaliland is stuck. The world doesn't care about who governs better. Somalia remains a failed state but still holds Somaliland's UN seat. Somaliland is using political arguments, while re-recognition is a legal issue. As long as Somaliland doesn't legally expose Somalia's fraudulent and stolen its legal sovereignty, the world will keep pretending Somalia is the rightful state. What Somaliland must do now? Somaliland's path forward is not about convincing the world, it's about forcing the legal correction. 1. Stop leading with political arguments. Recognition isn't about democracy, it's about legal statehood. 2. Legally expose Somalia's fraudulent claim over Somaliland and take the case to international courts. 3. Reclaim Somaliland's 1960 legal status instead of acting like a new country seeking approval from 1991. 4. Expose Somalia's annexation instead of negotiating with a failed state. Somaliland already has a de jure claim to statehood, but it has never actively enforced it. To reclaim its full international rights and legal protections, Somaliland must shift from political lobbying to legal action. Challenge Somalia's fraudulent claim. Somalia stole Somaliland's sovereignty by taking its UN seat and international credentials without a legally binding union. Somaliland must legally expose this fraud by pushing for an ICJ International Court of Justice case on state continuity, using the AU's 2005 fact-finding report, which admitted no legal union existed, demand its stolen seat at the UN. Somaliland's independence was already recognized before Somalia's. That means Somalia never had the right to Somaliland's UN seat. Somaliland must demand a legal review of Somalia's fraudulent claim at the UN, just as other states have done in disputed sovereignty cases. Assert control over airspace and borders. A recognized state has full control over its airspace, waters, and resources. Somalia still profits from Somaliland due to Somaliland's lack of legal enforcement. Somaliland must challenge Somalia's illegal control over Somaliland's aviation fees in international courts. Block Somalia from signing agreements that affect Somaliland's borders or economy. Take a hard legal approach to international engagement. Somaliland's biggest mistake has been playing politics instead of law. Instead of waiting for recognition, it should refuse to engage as a regional government and instead demand representation as a sovereign state. Expose how countries have been illegally engaging with Somalia on Somaliland's resources. Stop seeking de facto status and start pressing for legal correction. Recognition isn't a favor, it's a legal right. Somaliland needs to build strategic legal alliances instead of just political friendships. The bottom line: Somaliland is already a de jure state, but it hasn't asserted that legal status on the international stage. It doesn't need to beg for recognition, it needs to enforce what it already has. The world operates on legal precedent, not political arguments. Meanwhile, Somalia, the failed state, still benefits from Somaliland's stolen sovereignty. Failed Somalia still controls Somaliland's airspace and profits from it. Somalia still claims Somaliland in international agreements. Somalia still uses Somaliland's credentials to act like a real country. The longer this drags on, the more dangerous it gets. Somaliland remains legally vulnerable to annexation, invasion, or even a second genocide in the name of reuniting Somalia. Without legal recognition, Somaliland has zero international protection.